Hello, friends. We are back to talk about the most recent episode of The Real Housewives of New York. I have absolutely no idea what episode number this is. I think it's 9. I always say I don't know, and then I guess, and then I'd be right. So I'm pretty sure it's 9. We really didn't get any tea in this episode until they got to like the lunch that they were having, and they're making jokes about somebody's dress that they like. So it created them, it led to them having this joke like, oh, let's do a dress swap. And I think it was Jessel who's like, yeah, a dress swap, but not a wife swap. And Aaron's immediately like, can we not? And I feel her because, I mean, she really lost that battle. Not that I'm not Team Aaron on it. I agree with her on it. But she lost that battle in terms of, like, the ladies didn't give a damn. And so she's just like, can we not go back there? Like, it was never resolved. It's not going to get anywhere. So let's move on. I do like that Uba stepped in. Like, I always like people to come in with their own perspectives. And I like that Uba came in and she's like, well, Sai, like, how would you feel if Bryn had done that to your husband? And Sai immediately was like, I wouldn't care. Like, don't bring it to me. Like, I don't care, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's very convenient for that to happen. It's very dismissive, which we'll see throughout the whole portion of this scene. Like, they're all going to be very dismissive of it because it doesn't affect them. And I mean, that happens in everyday life. Like, when a situation doesn't affect you and you're just committed to being adversarial and misunderstanding, then you're not gonna give that. But I do like that Uber presented that challenge that Sai ultimately failed, but I guess we could have guessed that she would have failed a challenge like that. Bren then apologizes to Aaron specifically for calling the party boring. And Aaron is ultimately confusion. So am I. Because, how are you apologizing for calling the party boring, but you're not going to apologize for what she said she was upset about, and that's your interactions with her husband. So that was definitely extremely weird and definitely extremely interesting. But we know that we know that Bryn still doesn't feel like she did anything wrong there, so she's not going to be apologetic, and she still is justifying it and she's telling Aaron why Bryn doesn't think it was a big deal, as opposed to listening to Aaron explain to her why it was a big deal to Aaron, because that's actually the only part that matters. What Bryn feels about it does not matter. If Aaron felt like it was inappropriate, then she feels like it was inappropriate, which we ultimately get to. Jessel does come in, which I every time she comes in on this topic, again, her opinion on it doesn't matter either. But, she comes in, she makes a valid, arguable point. She's just like, everybody was laughing. The mood was laughy. Nobody thought it was serious. Even Abe was laughing. It's an arguable point. And also, I wasn't as upset with her bringing it up because it didn't feel argumentative or like she was trying to be convincing, or it wasn't like, it wasn't like her trying to make a point. It feels like she was just trying to say, let me just give you this tidbit just so you know, because she was involved as well in some capacity. And she's just like, it just didn't feel, I just want you to know it didn't feel like a negative thing. But it's kind of like hard to take that in because Bryn's like, it kind of started off from argumentative point because Bryn's defending herself. And she's like, but Aaron, you weren't there. Like, you wouldn't really know the vibe of it. But at the end of the day, like, context doesn't really matter for something like that. Like, that's her husband, and the topic itself was inappropriate. And Uba also calls BS on this. She's like, y'all would have a problem with that. Like, you know what I'm saying? Erin really hits the nail on the head when she's like, look, I thought it was inappropriate. Like, and I don't know why it's an issue for me to feel that way. Like, that's the feeling that I have, and we can move on. And Aaron's like, okay, but I apologize for that. And she's like, okay, fine, but I still feel like it was inappropriate. Like, I don't really know, what do you want me to say? Like, the issue is that Bryn's trying to defend whether it was appropriate or not, but you can't because that's how Aaron feels. So it is what it is. And then Bryn goes lefter, like even more left. And she is like, well, are you going to apologize to me for, alluding that I would be messing with a married man? And it's like, in what world? Like, in what world? And Aaron's like, you want me to give you an apology? It was very interesting because I wanted to know how Bryn was going to respond to this. Like, is she for real? I really want to know, like, is she going to be for real? And Sai saved by the bell because I don't think Bryn had a good answer to that. Like, Sai's like, let's just order our food. And the whole table just kind of moves on. And it felt like to me, it irritated me because Sai is now inputting her opinion. Like, none of you guys' opinions matter in any capacity. But Sai's putting her opinion in. She's like, I just don't care. Like, I want to move on. It's like, but it's not about you. So, and at the end of the day, I feel like the whole table, for the most part, for the sake of a generalization, for the most part, I feel like they were trying to move on because they knew that Aaron had a point, but they didn't want to. Besides Sai, they didn't want to. I mean, besides Uba, they didn't want to definitively say like, okay, Aaron has a point, because it's okay for two things to be true. I think it's okay to acknowledge that Bryn had that joking manner and she really was joking, but also that it still was inappropriate. I think it's okay for those two things to be true, but for the sake of acknowledging that, and I think these ladies know that, but for the sake of acknowledging it, they would have had to admit that they've already been dismissive. Like, they've already kind of dropped the ball on the argument because they made it clear last week that they don't really care. So in the event that they see Aaron's point, which I think that they do, they would have to be admitting like, okay, we were being adversarial, we were just being assholes, but we really do see where you're coming from. But still, Bryn was joking. There's no harm in saying that, but to their pride. So I feel like that's what's happening, and that's why they're trying to move on and just order food and blah blah blah. And Aaron's like, but I'm trying to have a conversation. Like, why can't we have the conversation? And it's because they know you're right, Aaron. So, but, you know, Sai then she does circle back around and she's like, okay, well, how can we dead this? Like, how can we dead it? But she goes wrong because she's like, because I don't really care about it. But then I like that Bryn, it kind of shows me maybe some maturity in Bryn, because Bryn also is like, well, we don't need you to referee it. Like, let's just let us talk it out. So I could appreciate that. It did then feel like Bryn was trying to actually come to a resolution and not just skate past it like Sai was. And, you know, Aaron's just like, look, like, I don't feel like it was a malicious. I understand where you're coming from. Bryn immediately says thank you. So she's listening. She got what she needed out of it, which I think is, you know, it's fine. I understand her feelings about it. So fine. She got what she needed. But then Aaron goes, you know, but I thought it was inappropriate. And that's just what it was. So I think that they both finally got what they needed. You know, the apology was had. I don't know if Aaron was still satisfied with the apology, but you know, I think that the conversation was good and it was productive, even though mostly everybody else at the table was being so unproductive. But luckily, they got through it as two grown women. And somebody else, and I have no idea who, but somebody else says like, okay, well, what else do we have to talk about to clear the table? And I lived for that because. Great, we had that explosive moment, but we don't want to be done. Like, let's do more. So I appreciated that. And in an awkward, Erin is really like a producer to me, like a secretive producer, because then she says, well, you know, like, Jenna, this whole thing, and she does like this, motioning towards like Jenna and Bryn. She never even mentions Bryn. She's like, Jenna, this whole thing, like, let's just get it out there. Like, you know, what is it? Let's get over it. And that's tea, because nobody has explicitly, at least in the group setting, said like there's tea between Jenna and Bryn. Like, we know, but like nobody has said it. So it was really cute for Aaron to go ahead and put that on blast. I really lived for it. Might be coming to Team Aaron, which is such a gag. Well, hold on. I just read another note. Let me. And then, you know, Sai jumps in per usual, and she is jumping along with the whole. It's weird because Bryn has a feeling against Jenna, right? Bryn feels like Jenna doesn't share, and like Jenna gets, you know, the favoritism type of thing. It's pretty much what Bryn's issue is. And then it's funny because Sai jumps in on Bryn's arguments with Jenna. So typically when somebody does that, it's because they're jumping in as a friend and they want to support your argument. But it seems like Sai has her own issue with Jenna. And then, you know, Jenna then switches over from the whole like favoritism argument to, and you also give us gifts that only benefit you. And then they move back from the gift thing, and Bryn then is talking about how, yeah, and like strangers know you better than I do. Like, I had to find out from Sai that your real name was whatever the heck her real name is. And then Judith. And then Sai is like, So this is the weirdest like combined argument ever against Jenna, and I feel like Jenna knows how weird and how spotty it is, and she's just like, look, like, because first of all, that was this BS whole like argument that Bryn brought up, of course. And she's like, you told this stranger your name, but you never told me it. She's like, I had a whole conversation with you guys at Friendsgiving about my family situation. And, you didn't even bring up that your real name was Judith. And it's like, because in what world would that make sense? And I love that Jenna clocked that. And I love that production clocked that.
The only time that my brother and sister and I lived with my parents was the first 6 months of my life. And we lived in like Section 8 housing, whatever.
Just so you know, my name was Judith when I was growing up, and I never felt like a Judith.
What? Stop! Gotta read the room. Why are you in this conversation?
I don't know. I'm not really sure why I'm getting called out for it. That's not the moment for me to start talking about myself.
If you had started talking about yourself in that moment, I would have slapped you. I mean, that was like not the moment.
Because Bryn, what are you talking about? And later on, we find out that Uba clocked it. Like, she's like, Bryn is just ridiculous.
Wait, Bryn is so ridiculous.
It's like, girl, what? Where Aaron had me messed up in this part was that when they were talking about it, because they also talked about the flight thing. They talked about everything. They really threw everything back at Jenna. So I'm just not clear on what the issue is, honestly. And, Aaron's like, well, it was coming from a good place. And it's like, Aaron, of course you've got to clean it up like that because Jenna gave you that information. She's the one that told you that she wanted to not fly coach. And you took that to the ladies and you created this whole issue. So, of course, now you've got to clean it up and say, well, us being messy was coming from a good place. And Jenna clocks that. She's like, y'all didn't care about me being on that flight. Like, it's literally not about that. And they're like, oh my God, yes it was. Like, we just wanted you to be with us. And it's like, girl, y'all want to be a mess. And Jenna sees it from a mile away. And then and because Bryn had made this whole on her fifth issue against Jenna, she makes this argument that like, oh, you give us gifts instead of connecting because you don't want to connect with us. And I thought that we had covered this. Like, I felt like multiple women in this group, including Jenna, had acknowledged that Jenna kind of had like a wall up and it was hard for her to like open up and be in the group. Like, I feel like we've heard so much about this. And so, and also from Aaron, let me note. So I think that, which is why Aaron gave her some favoritism in the first place in the Hamptons issue. The way that she described it to Bryn, she's like, well, she's getting used to the group. Listen. So, even Aaron has given us that context. And it's just like, but now Jenna's having to re-explain, like, look, my mom had Asperger's. Like, we grew up in a very quiet house. She taught piano when I came home because she was having piano lessons. I had to be quiet. I was by myself a lot. We didn't emote in my house. I didn't know my mother had Asperger's till I was in my 40s. So it took 40 years of me being emotionally detached and inexperienced, I guess, to really understand where it was coming from. Like, she is figuring these things out. And she has already said this. And everybody has already acknowledged it. So it was weird for her to finally get that out. And then she's got to get emotional. And Bryn's getting emotional as well. And I mean, they are being supportive, which is nice. Even Sai is like telling her, like, it's not a sob story. Like, this is your story. Those things are nice and they're affirming, great. But we have already had this conversation. I guess we did get a little bit more context, so fine. But y'all already knew that before you picked that fight with her, is what I'm saying. So there's really no resolve here because she's just reiterating what she's already told you, which I would have to assume is why she's getting emotional, because she's like, I told y'all this. And it's still such an issue. And they even get into like, okay, well, because I think it was Bryn that said we make an of ourselves when we assume instead of really knowing. But it's like y'all knew and y'all still made those assumptions. And Jenna clocks that. And she's just like, yeah, like, well, just don't assume. Like, just ask me. Like, y'all are literally causing this woman to be upset. And then you're like, oh, we're so sorry. And it's just like, are y'all delusional? Like, you caused this. So because of this, they then decide that they don't know anything about Jessel's childhood, which I would have to agree. We haven't really heard much about it. And so, she's like, well, what should I tell you? And we get this like montage of her talking for a very long time in a very choppy jump around way with some very kind of what seemed to be isolated portions of the story, so I can understand why, like, the confusion. Like, I'm like, girl, what are you talking about? But there were some pieces in there that I do feel like she was intending to talk about, like, where she was coming from, because it did start with like a, well, this is where my parents are from type of thing, and talking about her being immigrant. But I think that what she started to do was like throw out some facts that she's very prideful about, because she does have this background. She's like, I'm an immigrant, like, so I'm happy about this success, and like my uncles, like, they're photographers, they know these people. Like, I feel like that's where her story was going. So I can agree that it was less about her and her growing up, but I think it started that way and it just segued into her talking about, like, because those things do still affect her, like that is her family. So I think that was a thing. So I didn't love the way that it was like perceived by the ladies, because I knew that they were gonna take it weird, because Jessel does communicate differently than they do. And I think that it would have just been an easier call out, like, girl, but that's, I even would have really just kiki with her and been like, girl, what about your childhood though? Like, you're a little bit off the topic. I wish it would have gave more of that than the critical response that it gave, and it's only gonna get worse. So, we'll see what happens with that. It also segued into, I didn't think that we would get back to this for no particular reason, but I'm happy we did. And we get back to, like, Jessel saying, yeah, that's why, it bothered me when you guys said that it seems like I have been catered to. And a really weird part from production is they played two clips, and they played the clip that they played about 4 times now, where Jessel was like asking her mom to clean up fingerprints. Like, okay, she's a little anal. Like, we get it. Okay, that's a kiki, whatever. But like, I feel like you're trying to paint a narrative by playing that over and over. Then even worse, they play a second clip where it seems as though Jessel's mom is saying she's gonna put the twins down for a nap or something like that. Like, she's being shown helping out with the kids, and I'm like, so how does Jessel's mom's assistance of her daughter with her toddler twins, like, in present day, in relation to her being catered to growing up? Like, I don't get the two. So I didn't love that. I think that's a very unfair edit. Jessel's intending to, which has now been diminished by the ladies and production, but she's intending to, say that she didn't like being saying that she was catered to. She's an Indian woman in a country that's not hers. She was talking about, like I said, being an immigrant. I talked about this a little bit before, like, just her experience and why she is prideful and doesn't like being called catered to, but it gets completely skated over. So I didn't love that. But, it was what it was. We then get more about Psy, which I didn't expect. And she talks about, because I guess, yeah, they were just talking about upbringings and getting to know each other better, springboarding off of this Jenna thing. So we get more about Psy. And she's talking about the fact that her mom, I think she said her mom became an alcoholic when she was 16, because she said she didn't see the change. So I don't know if she was saying that her mom was an alcoholic before, but then it really turned for the worse at 16, or if it started at 16. But either way, obviously, terrible situation. But from the way I interpreted it, her mom was a certain way for 16 years, and then at 16, everything really changed, and it was just really weird watching her mom become another person. So that's an interesting thing to know about Psy, because that's kind of two-sided. Like, obviously there's childhood trauma, but it's like you had a particular type of childhood first, and then your childhood changed to be traumatic. So that's an interesting take, and it was interesting to hear about that. But I like that we also got like a positive thing about her mom, and she's like, I want people to know that my mom wasn't a bad person. So I really liked hearing about that with Psy, and seeing her get emotional was just nice story for Psy. Lastly, we get Bryn's story about, she's really adamant about the fact that, yes, she doesn't want to get married and have kids. And somebody acknowledges at the table, they're like, oh, I like that you're sticking to that. I think it was Aaron. And I agree. Like, I don't know her that well, but like, I do like that is a conviction that she has, and she really does. Like, she seems excited about it, and like she's really planning for it. So she's been talking about it a lot. So I like that. And she, starts sharing her story about how she froze her eggs, well, wants to freeze her eggs, and she went to the consultation, but they were saying that embryos are more viable, and so, they recommended embryos. That part, obviously, I wouldn't know. I'm not a woman, I've never been through the process, I don't know. But that part made sense to me, right? Like, because an embryo is already a fertilized egg, right? In case I'm mistaken. But so it's more viable. So I guess I agree with that. Like, I didn't see the issue. But then I think that where I kind of thought that she may have been fabricating is saying, like, yeah, like they wanted me to have a partner chosen out already. Like, I was going through my phone list and looking to see who I could name as a partner for an embryo. I'm sure, obviously, if they had the conversation with her about the embryo, it would include the talk about a partner. But I'm sure the fabrication comes in where she's like, I had to, find one on the spot, is what I would be assuming. So that's kind of where I assumed Aaron was going when she was like, this kind of sounds ridiculous to lie about, right? And she kind of leans over and she's having that conversation with Jenna. I can tell that Jenna's not really trying to get into it because she's like, girl, you're a mess. And last time I spilled some tea to you, we ended up here. So, girl, but whatever. She's like, that's a weird lie. Jenna's not giving her anything. So, to her credit, at least she turned to Brynn and told her, like, to her face, like, I don't really believe the embryo part. The way she communicated it was weird and it felt like, girl, you're trying to try me. But to her credit, I guess, or like benefit of the doubt, I do think that Aaron communicates weird and emotes weird. So I do think that, like, in her bringing it to her in that group setting in the moment, it really was her trying to joke. And so I didn't take it. It's not my experience. Like, I'm not Brynn, so I didn't take it that seriously. So I understood why Aaron was saying she didn't take it seriously, but I do think it was weird, and I can understand 125% why it would have bothered Jessel. I mean, why it would have bothered Brynn, and obviously it did. And Brynn tells us that it bothered her. She gets extremely emotional, and, rightfully so. And she's like, this is something that's important to me. So that made sense to me. Almost immediately, though, like, they get in the car to leave. And Aaron does apologize to Brynn and says, I apologize for using the word lie. Because, like I just assessed, I feel like she kind of just felt like the story was being embellished a little bit. And she said it to Jenna, like, she embellishes. And Jenna still wasn't really trying to get into that tea, girl. But she's just like, Brynn embellishes. And she's like, that's what it felt like to me. So... And it was funny because she asked Jenna, like, well, did you feel like that was a weird story? And Jenna's like, I feel like, and Aaron cuts her off to get her to the same conclusion. She's like, Brynn embellishes. So it was really Aaron. Aaron just felt that way. So, but she apologizes for using the word lie. Like 2 hours later, I guess they're about to go to dinner or something, or some next event. And Brynn, she's telling Sai, I'm tired and I just don't want to go. I thought that this was going to be another one of their, like, mean girl kiki kaka moments, but it was just a chill conversation where she's being honest. She's like, I'm tired, like, I'm cool, but I just don't want to go. I need a little bit of a break. Sai's like, cool, you can get a break. And I like that Brynn followed it up by going to Aaron, like, I'm not kicking it tonight, but I want you to know it's not about you. And I like that they were able to, like, come to terms with that and be cool and be chill and move on. And it's nice to see, like, Aaron have another level of, like, acknowledgement and say, like, yeah, I feel bad that I, made the joke and it hurt her. And so, yeah, she wants to move forward. So I like that. It was a good resolution to me for the entire episode. And another episode where the girls are on Jenna's back. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens next. I really do want to see, like, what the heck is about to happen with this Uba and Sai thing. I mean, this Uba and Aaron thing, because, like, I feel like it's really getting, like, promoted a lot. So I need to see the tea on that. So we'll see.